So thank you so much for having us here today to share with you our efforts on really well, for our center and maybe several other centers across the nation, sort of new way of engaging patients, their families, and also the research enterprise. So I wanted to first, I guess, introduce ourselves because we're two different areas of the cancer center that typically don't meet, and so I'll let Anne go ahead, and then I'll follow up.
Okay, my name is Anne Bidelman, and I'm the manager of Moffitt's Patient and Family Advisory Program, which means that I partner with patients and caregivers and give them the opportunity to meet with our top leadership once a month and share, their pain points. What are some things that they're experiencing that we need to know about so that we can make enhancements to improve the patient experience. And they also, we partner with patients and caregivers to help them share their stories for educational opportunities and many other things. But this photograph is a picture of some of the patients and caregivers that we partner with and some of Moffitt's leaders. And this program has been in existence since 2005. So it's a very well-developed, strong program at Moffitt.
Awesome. Cool. So, hi, everyone. My name is Eric Lau. I'm a basic research scientist. I'm an assistant professor on the basic research side. And these are my 5 lab kids, who I call them. They are PhD students who are super dedicated and motivated to the cause. And together we study a process called fucosylation. So this is the process by which mammalian and all sorts of cells uptake a dietary sugar called fucose and use that not as an energy source, but rather as a modifier of proteins. So what we call a post-translational modifier. So proteins in the cell can be modified by this sugar, and then depending on how they're modified structurally by the sugar, they can go off on their merry way to do different things within the cell, including regulating all kinds of key signaling pathways and regulating the interactions between tumor cells and other cells within the body, stromal cells, immune cells, what have you. And the reason why we're interested in this is because, and in a work that was just recently accepted for publication, what we found is that this sugar is actually very tumor suppressive. So if we, for example, what you see here is a melanoma mouse model. And so within 42 days, these tumors grow to be gigantic on the mouse scale. And if we feed them just with the sugar and nothing else, there's no side effects except that the tumors drop in size. And we've spent the better part of, all of the kids have spent a better part of the past 7 years trying to figure out how this works. And it's upcoming work, but basically we discovered that it triggers a very potent immune response. So that's basically in a nutshell what we do. You might wonder, how is it that we sort of started a collaboration with Anne's team? And it really was a very sort of unexpected incident back a few years ago, where my husband, who's on the call, Dr. Lim Li Lau, so he's a clinician at Moffitt, and one of his patients, who happened at that time to be a late stage metastatic melanoma patient, happened to not be doing so well. Currently she's fine. Thankfully, she's doing very well. But at that time, she was a young woman in her early 30s who had not been diagnosed with metastatic melanoma before, but her first diagnosis was with brain metastatic melanoma, 2 very large lesions in her brain. And this is what she looked like before. And this is what Danielle looked like not too long before we met her. And it happened to be that year that Danielle really was not doing very well and was in sort of a emotionally, psychologically dark place. And we really wanted to try to give her some hope and to give her another perspective of what might be coming down the pipeline for patients like her who have metastatic melanoma. So my husband came home one day and said, "Hey, I have this patient. She's really not doing well. You think we can bring her up to your lab, have her meet the kids, and have them run through what it is that they do to give her an idea of some of the hopeful things that are coming through the research pipeline?" And I said, "Sure." So we prepared the lab to give our regular lab tour that we give to any lay people who come through, and sort of unbeknownst to us, by the time all of my students finished going through each of their individual projects, Danielle just sort of turned the whole thing around, and for the better part of about half an hour, told us about just the awful, harrowing journey that she went through from the day that, but the day that she first collapsed on the floor, was rushed into the emergency room, and was diagnosed with brain tumors. At the age of 30, it's no one expects that. I mean, no one expects that at any age, but for someone so young to be hit so hard so early, I mean, the hairs stand up on my arms just even thinking about the day that she was telling us about this experience. And it was not planned. It was completely raw, emotional. I mean, you can probably imagine the entire lab was in emotional shambles. Everyone sort of took a walk on campus and sort of let it out. And, but all I can say is that after that experience, I have never seen my lab move faster in their daily work and their research than after having met Danielle. And on the flip side, my husband came home and said, hey, Danielle is emotionally in a little bit better of a place. And maybe Anne, having talked to her, maybe you can comment on the effects that it had on her after sort of letting it out.
I feel like she was so empowered. She just felt like she was on cloud nine, and being able to meet the researchers just gave her so much hope. I think she felt like what she's experienced had an impact on the researchers, and that gave her so much hope. Being stage 4, she needs research, she needs new clinical trials, and I think that it just was such a cathartic experience for her. Not only, from what I've heard from Lim, after that initial organic lab session, but then she actually participated as, an official patient researcher forum attendee, sharing her story. And I think that was a phenomenal experience, not only for her, but for her parents. They came with her as her primary caregivers, and I think it gave them a lot of hope as well. And just hands down a positive experience from all I could tell.
Yeah, I would say also one other thing that I think was also meaningful to her that was perhaps different was that she had been in and out of the clinic so many times, in and out of urgent care, emergency room, the cancer center, clinic side. I think she had grown used to meeting clinicians who are often trained to be much more maybe or much less emotional than a bunch of researchers who were completely unprepared, to emotionally respond to this story, because we didn't know that we were going to, be privy to this. So I think for her to see this group of people who, I mean, literally the way our cancer center is, if you look to the left of Anne's head in her background, that's the hospital. If you look to the right of her, that's the research building. It's the patients almost, you basically never see the researchers. So they don't know that they have a whole building full of other people that are not clinicians working for them. And so for them to have the opportunity to meet us and then to see that we can become emotionally really vulnerable along with them, I think it is a very meaningful thing and does give them a lot of hope. So that's basically in a nutshell what sort of kicked this whole effort off. So this was our team PRF. Basically, we had started with Anne, and then Anne's former colleague Kim. This is Danielle here when she was doing significantly better months later. This is my partner in crime, Lim, and me. And so we decided that we had to really push out this effort to try to replicate these effects for as many researchers and as many patients as we possibly could. But we had to do it in some sort of an organized way. And our goals were really simple. First and foremost is to educate the patients about the current state of research. They often have no idea what is going on. And I think it's partially, it's our fault for not communicating, our research efforts to the community better. so there's a community or patient education. We want to provide a safe space for them to emotionally release, perhaps in ways that they haven't before, by meeting people that they haven't before. We really wanted this experience to help researchers connect with patients, because so often, as probably many of the researchers on the call know, you don't really have a face to put to the disease that you might be studying. And that's really an important thing, to render what you're doing less of an academic exercise per se, and more of a personalized, patient-centered effort. And really what we wanted to do was to promote a more compassion-driven and patient-centered research perspective. So really sort of try to change the culture at the center and not keep both entities so separated, so that we're all sort of on the same journey together. So that was basically the goal, and the setup was pretty easy. I'll let Anne sort of start, because it always starts with picking a patient.
Okay, thanks, Eric. So I mentioned earlier that in my role, I partner with patients and caregivers. And so I partner with about 60 different patients and caregivers at Moffitt. So for them to become volunteers in the program, they've gone through 2 interviews. One of those interviews is with a licensed clinical oncology social worker, because we want to make sure this is a mutually beneficial partnership, where obviously they're going to benefit Moffitt, but we want to make sure that this experience is benefiting them too, and that they're in the right place for it in the spectrum of their cancer journey. And then they go through training as well. And so we have, relationships with 60 different patient and caregiver advisors. And I kind of tried to look at, well, who do I think has, good communication skills, is not afraid of public speaking to some degree. You have to be comfortable, who's ready to share their story, who would find this to be, who would like to make an impact with researchers, who would like to learn more about research, make sure they don't have a separate agenda, or someone. And one of the key things, because every single patient has a story to share, one of the key things is really, I look for someone who's willing to be vulnerable, because sometimes there might be a patient that wants to share their story, but they want to share their story that, I got through it. I'm done. It's in my rearview mirror. It was hard, but I'm here, and kind of isn't willing to kind of touch those more difficult moments in their journey. And really, that is where the connection and the learning occurs, from my point of view, is for the patient that's willing to talk about not only was this very difficult for themselves, but how hard it was on their relationship with their fiance or their finances, and how, delve into the things that are really hard. Yes, the treatment worked, but these are the side effects that I'm living with. This is the chemo brain, or, the reduced cognitive functioning that is here with me forever, and how I'm dealing with it and coping with it. And when the patient is willing to be vulnerable like that, it's really impactful. And so we look for diversity as well. And so far, the primary focus is diversity of disease. So we've had, you'll see in a minute, all the different types of cancer that our patients have experienced. But I prep them once they're selected, and we talk about it with Eric, and we decide, okay, this is who we're going to go with. Then I make sure that they're prepared, because I want them to be comfortable. And so I meet with them ahead of time and listen to their story, and make sure I point out, oh, that's, I think, could be really impactful for the researchers to hear. Let's talk more. Can you tell me more about this? And just kind of make sure that they're prepared and, ready and comfortable sharing. Some folks, like Danielle, when she presented, she read it off her phone, and that's what she was comfortable with, and that's perfectly fine. Most people are just kind of more conversational, but whatever the patient is comfortable with is what we want to encourage them to do. Sometimes they will bring their caregiver with them, And that can pose some challenges and opportunities too. If the caregiver is a really strong personality, they sometimes might take over a little bit. We learn so much along the way. That's one thing we've learned. We've also learned that having somebody come that is too scared, like they're showing signs of being very, very nervous, well, that's probably a red flag that we should just not do it, because it's not probably going to work out as well. We did have one interesting situation happen where a patient that we knew really well and her husband came, and the husband really wanted to speak for the patient a lot, which was a little surprising. And afterwards, I understood from Lim, one of her clinicians, that she felt really empowered from that experience to speak up more and use her own voice, which I thought was a really interesting side benefit that occurred from the situation. But we've been fortunate, though, that we really know the patients that we're putting in this position. So either they were in our program and I've had a strong relationship with them, or Lim referred them from one of his patients and he has a strong relationship with them. So that seems to be a key ingredient, is someone really knowing the patient and knowing that they're going to be impactful. And that would be my recommendation. So after I prep them to share their story at the day of the event, I take them on the lab tour, and it could be a wet lab or a dry lab, and they get to listen to the researchers talk about their work, and they are so grateful. And the researchers do a great job of making it understandable, sharing information at a level that the patient and caregiver can understand to the best of their ability. But it's fascinating to see. This is like pulling back the curtain on something the patient has never seen before, and they get to see, the work that they're doing is potentially saving their life, and it is that dramatic. And they are so grateful and thankful for the opportunity to see it in person. So I'll hand it over to you, Eric, to talk about what occurs at the same time that the patient is in the lab tour.
Sure. Thank you, Anne. So I would also like to reiterate that something that Anne does a great job on that's so important is that when she preps the patients to tell their stories, and when she goes on the lab tours with them, it's not just them simply telling their story or asking questions to the researchers in the lab. They've also been prepared to maybe highlight issues that they've had to deal with or that they've experienced as a patient, on their cancer journey, whether it is an unexpected symptom or side effect or something that impacts them that maybe researchers would otherwise not know about. And they're specifically coached in that way to help sort of provoke new thought on the research side. And this is something that was very, I think, intentional. We wanted to make it this emotionally cathartic experience, but it's also a way for the patients to really feed in and give input to the research side in ways that they haven't been able to have the opportunity before. So that's so Anne does a phenomenal job with that, and we could not be more grateful. And so while Anne is on the tour with the patients in the labs, we gather a room full of up to 25 researchers. They're from all over the research side of campus. They could be all different levels, from entry-level research associates to PhD students, postdocs, staff scientists, other principal investigators and faculty. And then what we do, because these researchers come from all over different areas of Moffitt research, they don't necessarily study that particular type of cancer that patient has that we're featuring that day. So we want to make sure to brief and get everybody up to speed. So we will reach out to clinicians who are experts in that particular type of cancer. We'll find one of the leading experts from our hospital, bring them over. And at the same time that the tours are going on, the research attendees for this forum will actually get a sort of crash course briefing. Everything about how we intake, diagnose, frontline treatment for that particular type of cancer, issues with diagnosis that are continuing unmet urgent needs that we need to figure out how to solve. So for example, suboptimal biomarkers, if there are no good diagnostics or suboptimal diagnostics, these are sort of points that are driven home to the researchers that, we need to improve these things. We will go through everything from frontline therapies, how effective they are or how ineffective they are. In addition, we will also talk about what happens when disease relapses. What sort of salvage therapies are there? What options are there? What are the sort of most cutting edge experimental therapeutic options for patients? And really, what are the needs? Because not everybody, even who's studying that particular type of cancer, may know, at the clinic level, what are the absolute urgent needs right now. They may be familiar with the literature, but that may not always reflect what the most urgent needs are. So we really try to provoke people to think about this. And, we take the opportunity that since we're bringing other researchers studying different types of tumors, or maybe they're even more focused on stromal cells like immune cells or whatnot, and not so much the tumor intrinsic biology. We bring all of these different researchers together in hopes that maybe people will get ideas and share them, and that can help to influence the direction and the trajectory of research projects. So that basically occurs concurrently. So it's about an hour on each side. And then we will bring everybody together. And that's kind of what we call, where the magic happens. And it seems like a really simple thing. But we sort of strategically ordered it such that we bring everybody into a room, and we know that it can be really daunting for anybody, much less, someone with active cancer who's a patient, to just walk into a room and see 25 strangers that they're about to tell their life story to. And so what we ask everybody to do is we ask all the researchers to go around the table, and each person gets a very brief amount of time to introduce themselves, who they are, what they do in terms of research, what their current research project is in a very, very sort of lay, easily digestible way. And then most importantly, and we always, before we move on to the next person, we really ask every researcher to divulge what is their personal motivation for dedicating their life to cancer research. And 9 times out of 10, it's, I have a family member, I have a grandmother, aunt, father, uncle, whatever, who is dealing with cancer. Oftentimes, the researchers don't even know how emotional they're going to get when they first start sharing these experiences. It's a super important step, I think, for the roundtable, because it ends up showing to the patient that we are as willing to become vulnerable in front of them as they are going to be with us in a few minutes. And it's a very moving thing to be to experience, to be sitting around a table full of people with a common goal and a common mission to open up in those ways. And it is very emotional. I remember, actually, Anne, you probably remember the very first one we ever did. I talked about how it was my grandmother who raised me until she passed when I was 13. She passed of lung cancer, and we went around the room, we did the whole thing. And then afterwards, the patient finally had a chance to sit down and eat lunch, and she started asking me more about my grandmother, and I just started bawling uncontrollably. I had never actually opened up and talked openly to anybody really about this before, who I don't know that well. So I didn't even know that it would have that effect on me. So you can sort of look around the room and see the emotional impact as it's moving around the room, and it's a very powerful thing. So we go around the room, and it gets to the patient and their caregiver, and they have the floor. They go for it, and we're there to listen and to learn from them. And afterwards, there's open Q&A, and we take a group picture. And I don't know, Anne, if you want to comment any more on that. But
well, I think that you can almost see it in the body language of that second picture down there, that everybody is really engaged. And Eric does a really good job of setting up a safe space that is intimate. And in our busy days of Zoom now and all of our work, it's kind of refreshing, to be able to be in a space where there's a lot of mutual sharing happening that evidently leads to increased motivation and outside the box thinking and, all good things. So I think though that it's really, I don't know exactly how you do it, Eric, but you do create a very intentionally or organically create a very intimate and safe space that I think is part of the magic of this as well.
I think also it's, I don't want to say this, but it almost feels like sometimes we select for an audience of people who are very interested in engaging with patients. Oftentimes we have what we call the repeat offenders. So the researchers who keep coming time and time again, which has actually caused us to think about, okay, how do we expand this beyond 25 people? But I think there's some people who respond really well to this sort of emotional experience that we have, but we try to really expand that beyond the group. But I think it's honestly the research culture that we sort of had at baseline and what we're continuing to try to build at Moffitt. So yeah, so that's basically what it looks like. Obviously as the research enterprise, we're always interested in collecting data to see what we can do with it. And so we had a very, very, very low throughput, simple series of surveys that we crafted and printed out and passed out at the end of each forum. And so the idea was to see if we can collect data on emotional and sort of perspective changes that people might have experienced, the attendees might have experienced before versus after experiencing a patient researcher forum. So we had surveys specifically for patients, and we could sort of delineate whether they're a patient on active or finished therapy, or if they're a caregiver, if they've ever had cancer, et cetera. And then we sort of have a battery of questions, sort of evaluating, what they felt. And I certainly am not a behavioral scientist, so this was a very sort of rudimentary questionnaire. We did a very similar thing for the researchers. So we figured out who they were and then figured out, with a numerical scoring scale, how they might have felt that this applied to them or didn't apply to them, how it might be worked into, for example, their grant writing efforts or whatnot. Ultimately, so Moffitt does have a very strong behavioral science, pop science division. And so we actually ended up collaborating with them. They refined our questionnaire to be much more sort of comprehensive and proper. So proper behavioral science, as opposed to this, whatever I was pretending to do. And then they streamlined it and put it online. So it's so simple now to the point where we just put up a QR code at the front of the room, and all the attendees can sort of scan the QR code for patient or researcher, and then they can do the survey on their own time. And so that was basically how we collected data for the paper that Bryn, you were referring to before, for our findings. And I mean, so as Anne was saying, we have featured a ton of different types of cancers. These are just some of the ones that we featured. So they're all over the map. It's not any particular type or theme of cancer. We've got solid cancers, blood cancers, etc. But really, I think what it boils down to, and we've tried doing sort of like themed patient researcher forums before, but I think, and please chime in. I think the way that we have the most success is really by choosing the patient. It all boils down to the patients, right?
Yeah, I definitely agree. We have tried it the other way, like it's like we're gonna do a patient researcher forum in the middle of Lung Cancer Awareness Month, and we've gotten input that it would be good to have 3 patients from 3 different ethnic minority groups, and so that kind of removes it from anyone I know. And while I think that's a great idea, it makes it very difficult, and it's time consuming to find patients that would fit that category. And then secondly, we don't have a relationship with them. We don't, social work hasn't been involved. A clinician of some kind hasn't been involved. And it's just a little bit more risky as to, will the event turn out the way that you want it? Will it be as impactful as you want it, you hope it to be, for everyone involved? So we're more comfortable in the situation where somebody on our team, knows the patient or that's involved.
Yeah, I think as this forum expands and more clinicians get on board and know about this effort, that they can probably identify patients who they deal with more regularly and maybe refer them to us. And I think so we have a little team now with help from administrators to help build this out. I think it would be good of us to maybe even market it around to different clinics so that the clinicians know that, okay, if I find a patient who would be a good speaker, let's forward them on to Anne and Eric, and we'll go from there. So another example is, recently you might be aware that December 1st was AIDS Awareness Day, or World AIDS Day. And we were really trying to do an HIV/AIDS positive cancer patient forum so that we could really bring to light and highlight the issues that we need to consider when we're treating patients who are HIV/AIDS positive. It's not something that necessarily people think about all the time. And there's a lot of stigma behind it, which makes it all the worse. But for cancer therapy, especially if we're talking about immunotherapies, it's a really important consideration. And initially we had, I think, two patients we had identified, or the clinicians had identified, and then ultimately it ended up that nobody felt comfortable sharing their story on camera, or even in front of a group of people. I think, Anne, one was not out, or something like that.
The person that I spoke with, a clinician, recommended, he hadn't shared with anyone in his family his HIV status. So he wasn't comfortable even writing a letter or participating in any fashion, although he seemed as though he would have been very appropriate, but it wasn't appropriate for us to really ask him to do that. He wasn't at the right place. And so that's a challenge, that's a great idea, but pulling it off is a challenge.
Yeah, I think it'll require a lot of legwork up front, and maybe moving into 2023, this is what we need to aim like 6 months ahead of time to prepare this. So,
possible, and I think it's important. We just can't do it the same way that we're doing it now.
Right. And I think oftentimes the challenges as well, because this is also another important point, is that we don't often know for sure that a patient is willing to and is emotionally, okay to give a talk until sort of last minute. So it's been a lot of, Anne talks to the patient, confirms, and then we're scrambling to get it together in like a 2-week period. So it's required a lot of help, and a lot of people from around the Institute have jumped on board to help out. So it's been really nice to see people coming together. So, all right, just for sake of time, I'll move ahead. So this is just to give you an idea of, for the paper, featured 16 patient researcher forums where we were able to gather data. We've had, I think, about 19 to date, but just to show you, we in total of those 16 forums, 8 patients and or caregivers were willing to take the survey, and 72 researchers were willing to or got their surveys in on time. Now, the researchers, the 72, there were actually more surveys submitted. It's just that with the researchers, if they were repeat attendees, they would, just keep resubmitting, so we would count them as one. So I think this sort of highlighted an area that we really do need to work on in the long run, which is exactly how can we get the response rate for these surveys to be up, so we can really get a wider pool of data, because if we've got, let's say 19 at this point patients, we should be getting closer to that number of patients giving their surveys back. And I don't know if we don't want to bother them and harass them to give us, their responses, but also some of them may or may not feel like taking a survey immediately after they've emotionally opened up about, their story. So, we'd also like to incorporate more faculty participation. We found that there's a lot of So as you can see here, graduate students and postdocs, but there's not really as much faculty. And I think if there's more faculty buy-in, we'll be able to really get more of the different lab staff to be encouraged to participate. Right. And let's see. So we thought we would share some of the feedback because that's honestly the most compelling part of the forum. And so I'll hand it over to Anne to talk about the patient caregiver responses, and then I'll do the researchers.
Okay, so I just would like to read this first one aloud. I always knew Moffitt was working on research, but I didn't realize to what scale. It was quite surprising to see how significant the size of the research center is and the cancers being worked on. I was so impressed with the therapies which are being researched simultaneously. It is just not something at Moffitt that we share with patients. You know, it's hidden and in a separate building. And it really just means so much to them to be able to see it in action and gives them so much hope. And I'll read just one more and then I'll pass it back to Eric. But the tour and discussion in the myeloma labs, the relaxing and comfortable format used for giving the presentation, all the attendings taking a few minutes to tell us about their work. That is just so important to them. They love hearing from the folks around the room what they, what they're doing and why it's understanding their why. It's beautiful to see how you can just see how much the patients appreciate the work that these researchers are doing. And again, it's so comfortable. We don't make it, it's the opposite of presenting. It's just sharing and conversation.
All right, cool, thank you. All right, so so I have not yet met a researcher who hasn't had some sort of visceral emotional reaction. It's pretty much guaranteed that every single researcher is going to come out more motivated and more moved to pursue their research in a faster way, to pursue it in a different way, and to really think about how their research is not just experiments, but could be geared towards actually helping, in some aspect of the patient experience. And actually, in one case, it was unintentional, but we actually helped a researcher decide to move away from research and to go to medical school. So that was like unintentional, and hopefully we didn't anger her boss too much. But I think it really it induces a bit of introspection for what people really want to do with their careers, and it really pushes people to think more about how can I help patients. And so I think, honestly, really, it's the bulk of it is this middle quote here, which is getting to meet an actual patient puts a face to the work we do every day and helps motivate me more and humanizes the work that I'm doing. And as I tell the trainees when they're trying to decide if they want to participate in a forum or not, I'll let them know. I'm like, you are siloed up in your lab. We have a 4-story building with 4 stories or 3 stories of labs, and you never get to interact with your stakeholders. Like, it's part of your, I will tell my students, it's part of your civic duty, because our research funding comes from the NIH, National Institutes of Health. It's funded by taxpayers, and those taxpayers are patients. So it's really part of our civic duty to report to our stakeholders what it is that we're actually doing and how it could be helping them. So, right.
I just wanted to add, Eric, real quickly that, have the patients that do participate and share their stories, like Patty told me, Eric, that, she's kind of a mess 2 weeks before and then 2 weeks after, because they're reliving these really difficult moments of their lives and sharing them and, with this group. And we would not ask patients to do that if we didn't see this kind of benefit. It definitely gives patients hope, but this is why they do it. This is why they put themselves through that, is to make an impact on the researchers.
Right. And I didn't copy the results of the paper here, but if you want, it's in the paper. I mean, essentially what we've done is not, it's not rocket science, right? It sort of makes sense that if you bring these two parties together, that there's going to be an emotional exchange, and that, the researchers will end up coming out really, motivated, and sometimes actually form bonds with researchers. So Anne is bringing up this one patient, Patty, who's a metastatic breast cancer patient. She bonded with my former postdoc. I mean, they were keeping in contact even after my postdoc, left the institute and moved to California. I mean, that's the emotional bond that they, that sometimes happens, and it's a kind of a beautiful thing to see. So, yeah. All right, so basically, in summary, this is what the forum really has been aiming to do. It's to give the researchers at the end of the day, the researchers get an opportunity to practice communicating their stuff to lay audience. We're really pushing to. Not pushing that hard. We're really pushing to sort of build a bridge between the researchers and the patients, so that there is no longer this separation, between the two buildings. And we think that the forum is really a venue for the researchers to come and to, whether it's emotionally recharge or emotionally charge their work. What we do see is that, and what we have found through our data collection, is that it does sort of recharge researchers who may feel burned out. They're often under such pressure to publish, to submit grants, to submit fellowships, that they sort of lose track of the original motivations of why they started cancer research in the first place. And this, I think, helps them to revisit and to re-trigger that emotional core. And for sure, it gives the patients and caregivers a better understanding of what's going on in the research building on the other side of the driveway. And more often than not, we are always asked at the end, how can a patient or a caregiver or their families get involved to help advocate for research? Can they write letters to their congressperson? Can they, and ultimately, this is something that we're trying to build here is, can we get patients on standby so that when researchers, for example, need to write a grant, our grant applications always benefit from having patient support. So we, if we can do like a matchmaking system, or we can match a patient to someone's outgoing grant application, that would, I think, definitely benefit both parties. And then here's the link to the publication that we also put in the chat. So this is just, group pictures that we've taken after a couple of them. And, every single one of these things is different. The format is structurally generally similar, but the sort of what is communicated in the story and the experience is just very unique from forum to forum. And I think that's why we have so many repeat offenders who keep reattending every single time. So, so actually earlier this year, we actually we piqued the interest of the White House. Dr. Jill Biden was going on a nationwide tour to jumpstart the Cancer Moonshot program. And so she actually visited Moffitt and was given sort of like a menu of things to see, and she and her team wanted to experience the Patient Researcher Forum. Which was sort of crazy because we were told that we had 10 minutes to replicate a patient researcher forum. And I kind of looked at her team and was like, you guys are nuts. These are like 2-hour affairs. Never going to happen. So we crammed it down to 20 minutes and because part of the Moonshot program relaunch is, they have an effort to really bridge the gap between patients and researchers. So we sort of fit right into a theme where they really wanted to learn how they could do this. She actually spent a good 40 minutes with us in the lab, getting to know our research. This is Patty here. So she met with Patty. I mean, emotional across the board. It was just crazy experience, but probably one of the prouder moments that I had with my kids. So hopefully we have a lot of work ahead. The COVID pandemic has really put a wrench in things because we couldn't bring people in person. And so we've actually had to try to adapt. To try to make this virtual, we actually pre-filmed. We brought in a film crew and pre-filmed lab tours, and tried to have people on Zoom talking patients through the lab tours. And in the meantime, we'd have breakout rooms for the clinical crash course. And that was just sort of a mess because it's so many different parties involved in trying to make this thing virtual. And then finally we got the green light last month to bring everything back in person again. So, I mean, with safety guidelines, but that will definitely make things a lot easier. So the question is, how do we scale up? Can we give this experience to more than just one patient caregiver at a time? And we've tried to do different iterations with groups. And I think that's worked pretty well with the metastatic breast cancer support group, which was about, I can't remember how many patients we had for that. It was about 12 or 13. Something like that. Yeah. And so really we'd like to foster stronger collaborations between researchers and patients, and figure out how we can get more patients to bring their crucial input into what we do on our side. So and with that, this is just a list of, I think, of all the labs that have been involved, all the PIs that have been in, or the labs and their PIs, all the clinicians who have agreed to do the clinical crash courses, our executive leadership, the pop scientists who helped us with the surveys, administrators who helped, and then our committee. And